came back to the weather office, and we used to have maps hung on the wall, these detailed computer maps, upper air maps, and we did the whole weather show from the raw maps that I usually look at behind the scenes to do it. And I thought, oh my God, so we're showing 500 millibar analyses and vorticity charts and explaining the weather and all. And I thought, well, this, and the people called in and said, hey, that was kind of neat. You know, that was something we hadn't, you wouldn't want to do it more than once, but it actually makes for some rather good television if you can get through it all right. And
that's good. I like that too. I like to show emotion on air when the story needs it, and I always tell myself stories are about people, not about things. And so if I'm out in the field, I interact with people, and I try to describe to the viewer how it feels more than what it is or what it looks like, because
people remember
emotions.
People
remember emotions, right? They won't remember facts, they won't remember what day it happened, but they'll remember how they felt in that moment. And that, so I'm very much about how something feels.
All right, we're going to open it up for questions, but before we do, let's all clap and then laugh. So they do we have any questions?
Well, I just wanted to ask if you guys ever took an improv class, or you think that's helpful, especially when you're like the deer in headlights and you have to be on your toes and, you lose your talking points. That might help. Or maybe.
I never did.
I did. Well, I don't think it was. I think it was more theater or something. Yeah. But it was, and that was early on in my education. But I think it totally helps. I think
so too.
Yeah. I think it's all. Oh my God, I have no idea what's going on with my voice here. I think it's all about being genuine and just be yourself. Just be yourself. And if you talk with your hands, like Maria was saying, you talk with your hands. And if you have to say good morning or whatever it is, just be yourself. And I think people will appreciate that much more.
Right, and I think what I have found to be most helpful, and I think improv would be great, it's a great way to train your brain. Because I have asked a lot of people, called on them to be an expert in a story. Like, I need to interview you about this. Well, I don't do good on camera. Well, that's because the only time they've ever been on camera was at, their nephew's wedding, and there was a guy with the camera saying, "Say something nice to the couple." Right. Like, good luck with your marriage, But what I say to the people that I call for an interview, I say, you know what? First of all, you're going to have me there. I'll lead you through it. I'm going to take the best 7 seconds, 8 seconds, 12 seconds of what you say. I'm not going to make you look like a moron. And the questions I'm going to ask you, the reason I'm calling you is because you're an expert. You know this stuff. It's not like you're an astrophysicist and I'm going to ask you how to make the best pancake in the world. It's something that you know about. So that's how I put those people. But I think improv would be a great way. Theater's another good way, because there are moments as an actor on stage when you don't have a take two, where you lose your line. And you have to just start to make something up. But I think training your brain, anyone can do live TV. Anyone can. It's just training. It's, an Olympic athlete trains. And that's what you have to do with your brain to be able to have the confidence to know that you can do that type of thing. And if it's doing it in front of your own camera at home with your computer, that's what you do. You just keep on working at it. And you just kind of start talking on camera, and then that's how you're going to become even better at it. Cool. Questions?
Well, yeah, I guess that was kind of my question then, because for those of us who maybe will be called upon to be an expert from time to time, but not necessarily on air, so you don't get that practice, you don't get that repetition. What tips you might have for preparing yourself, or for getting through an interview? I understand that if you know you've done your homework, you've done your research, and you know everything about your subject, but maybe you don't have as much experience being on air. So if you had any tips for that kind of person, so you mentioned about doing it in front of a camera, so that's a good.
And if you have any friends who are journalists, who are on TV journalists, on-air journalists, I would ask them, can you sit down with me and just role play a little bit, do an interview with me, maybe have a camera on you, and do it 2 different ways. Do it looking into the camera, and then doing it looking at your friend who's doing this with you. and just practice it. And that's the way you're gonna be. And you know, think about whatever you're an expert in, think of how the best way to explain something. Don't over-explain it, but think of how to get your point across. Bill Clinton was fabulous at making a point. He was, and he still was. A lot of people say that President Obama was reelected because of the speech that President Clinton gave at the Democratic National Convention, because he knew how to do something in an understandable way. And President Obama, for as great of a speaker as he is, has a tough time explaining something that's complicated because he goes into professorial mode. Bill Clinton just talks.
Yeah, you know, it strikes me that we spend the early part of our careers thinking about form. And it seems to me when you become most successful is when you stop thinking about the mechanics of doing it and you just speak. You know, early on in your broadcast career, you affect your voice, especially if you're on the radio, you're trying to be, and then you realize, hey, the trick here is just to talk. The point at which you stop thinking about how you're, the form, and start thinking about the content, really the information is what's more interesting and important. And the mechanics of getting it across shouldn't be anything, we don't think, you know, think about talking to another human being. Do we think about how should my face look? How should I be standing? What kind of gesture? No. When we talk to people, we just talk to people. And I think it's such an artificial environment we're in as we start in the media that we're made to think about the form, and then of course we're not helped by management that has consultants in and second guessing how you've done it. You know, maybe you ought to do this and do that. They'd be better off just, it's what Zach says, it's just repetition. Doing it, and you stop thinking about the mechanics on how you do it, and you start thinking about the story you're starting to tell. When you forget the camera's there, and the interviewee, the same thing, I think that's when you're most comfortable on the air and probably more clearly communicate to your audience, because they realize you're not thinking about the mechanics, they're listening to what you're telling them.
And remember that thing about emotion too. When you're called upon to be an expert, numbers and facts are good, but they're not necessarily sound bites.
Yeah.
What you are, if you're being called upon to be an expert in any area, say something like, this is how I feel about this. You know, if you're doing a story, if you're being called upon to do something about HIV treatments, just say, look, it is amazing that we have all these treatments now available to us. I mean, you know, 10 years ago we didn't have this. It's truly breathtaking to see where we've come in just the last 10 years, instead of going through all the statistics over the last 10 years.
Right.
Just like from the heart, basically, and that is what is going to make you stand out from another expert.
And a lot of times, kind of going off of that too, I mean, like when it comes to like the facts and figures and stuff, a lot of times that's something I'll just jot down like before or after the actual interview itself.
And reporters can actually fill in the blanks, because a lot of times sound bites will be the emotions. The reporter can fill in the facts, and then your job is to kind of interpret that from your standpoint. Jen, you had a question?
I was just going to ask, I'm a field producer, and I just wondered what you all need from us. I know you don't all have the luxury of having a producer and do so much on your own, but what is it that sometimes when I work with Christiane on the report, I give her a giant packet of stuff and she loves it, and sometimes I have reporters who would sooner, you know, die than have to read a lot of stuff. So is there something that would be exceptionally helpful for a producer to help you do your jobs better?
I just think that communication's key. I mean, I think communication's one of the big things. I don't have field producers, but I know even the producers back at the station. I mean, one of the big things is just making sure that everybody's on the same page, making sure that everybody has the same information. Because there have been times where information will come in shortly before a live shot and the producer failed to let me know, and I look like a fool on TV because I don't have the new information.
Maria was saying a good thing earlier, and I know I'm similar in the fact that you said you don't like to be bothered a minute before you go on. And I remember just a couple weeks ago with MH17, Philadelphia has a daily international flight to Tel Aviv. And I literally had the IFB in my ear, the producer in my ear with the anchor, an intern texting me, the airport calling me on this phone, and it was. And then I was looking. Then they had it tossed to me early because they lost something, and they came to me early. And I think as long as you have that communication and you know whatever whatever you got 5 minutes ago is still gonna be relevant.
Well, unless it's like a big update. of
Right,
course.
exactly,
Like,
exactly.
before, it's like 3 dead, and then all of a sudden it's like 15. I don't wanna go on the air saying,
The wrong
3
thing.
the
Right.
wrong thing. So
But
unless
it's-
it's an update like that, like, don't say, then, of course,
I
but,
appreciate that,
yeah. And so I think for me, the biggest role of a producer is just to keep me updated, keep me informed, making the phone calls to local officials and anybody else that, we think we need to speak to, whether it's witnesses or, and getting that for me so that I can focus on the report, on what I'm writing, what I'm saying,
I
and
would-
and they're doing.
And confirmation is important
Yeah.
too.
And I wish I had the luxury of having a field producer some days, because making phone calls, getting facts, getting interviews lined up, doing all that stuff is a big chore on top of trying to write a story as well. And I think, to your point, being out in the field and being a producer, kind of being an off-air reporter, that's what you are, is not only to get those facts, but also to have a top sheet of the most important things that you find interesting. And then likely that's gonna be what the reporter or the correspondent or the viewer finds interesting as well. Water. And I think also, if you're going out and doing interviews before the correspondent either arrives on the scene, or if you're the first on the scene, jot down time codes of the things that you find interesting, because having to log a 20-minute interview when you are on a tight deadline, if you're the one who has to go through this and write a piece, having those different things right at your fingertips to be able to say, all right, Jen thought that at 2013 was a great soundbite. Go to that and listen to it. And then that will help speed up the process, and that would make at least you a hero to me out in the field. And that would be great. And then getting those updates, and then serving kind of as that gatekeeper in a way, just so if you have to get into the moments and find your center, as Maria said, you are the point person, and you can act. And if you find it pertinent, like it all depends on who it is too, but if you find it pertinent, just say, hey, yada yada, like a brief update, like it's 15-10, not 3. Something like that.
Sean and I work with an amazing field producer. We have a series of them over at WGM, but Pam Grimes, and you remind me of Pam.
Thank you.
Yeah,
My praise indeed.
Seriously, and Pam, were she here, would be asking the same question. She, there are so many things that, as the talent of those shots that are running through your mind, that the field producer has the ability to stand back, look at the big picture, and also has done research on the story you're reporting on, along with you, and on her own, before you get out the story, and it's amazing. As part of the due diligence process as you're getting ready, the field producer is an absolutely invaluable assistant. And then when you're doing an interview, the field producer's been able to sit back and look at it. You, again, are so involved in the mechanics of it, and the thoughts running through your mind. The field producer may hear something that, and Sean says, that flags something that,
And one thing I want to say is, depending on who you're working with, if you're working with Christiane Amanpour, she has been at Network forever. If you're working with someone who is brand new to Network, they're not used to having a field producer. If I were to go to Network, I wouldn't know what to do with you. I've had field producers in the past, and I'm used to running my show. And instead of asking a new correspondent who's never had the luxury of a field producer before, what do you need from me, just kind of guide them, because you've been there. And I think that would be, as far from my perspective, if you were to just kind of say, all right, we have this, and this, or give times. There are so many times I'm calling into the station and bothering the producer because the writer hasn't bothered to tell me you're hitting at 9:08.
Right.
And I don't know when to be standing in front of the camera because I don't have the luxury of looking at a rundown.
That's true.
Simple things like that, communication between the desk and me. I mean, that is, I'm looking for things like that to be able to do that. Yeah, Tracy.
So this is NLGJA and Authentic Self. For those who it's relevant, can you talk about being out in your career on TV? It seems to be one of the last bastions of out journalists.
I could start off with that.
Yeah.
This past, was it last fall, I think it was, I came out publicly on social media. And I think that being on TV, I mean, social media is a huge thing and stuff like that. And my friends and my family, they knew about it and stuff like that. And it was kind of, okay, fine, whatever, no big deal. But I felt that the only way to be true to my audience is to be completely true with my audience. And so, I mean, and you're gonna have people who are gonna be like, oh, I can't believe that Matt Horn's gay or whatnot. Like, I mean, you're gonna have people who are supportive, you're gonna have people who are not supportive. I mean, that just comes along with anything, doesn't make a difference what it is. And I found that the amount of support that I received, it shows who I am. I mean, it doesn't show who I am, it doesn't make me who I am, but I mean, it shows a part of who I am, and I think that it kind of makes the viewers, makes people at home feel like that they're a part of our journey, my journey, what have you, so.
And Zach, you started out in Great Falls, were you out there?
No, I don't think, Richard Quest, I don't know if you were here the other evening for his thing, I think he said something that was really profound, and he said that he's a journalist that happens to be gay and not a gay journalist. And I think I'm not one that goes around waving a rainbow flag, if you will, or whatever. I think there are some, so I've never broadcasted it, I've never on social media have come out and said those words. In some ways, I think it's so, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and then on top of
I think it's irrelevant in some ways. I think, again, like I'm a journalist who happens to be gay, and so I think it's funny in the newsroom. Our main anchor, she's a black female, so she oftentimes brings these stories that are geared toward race to the table. My producer actually happens to be gay, so her and I are like bringing these stories that are affecting the gay community to the table. But I never want to be biased in a way toward.
I've always found it harder to cover
Yes,
subjects
because
in that realm
oftentimes-
because you were very sensitive to making
don't
sure
want to
that
be
you
thrown
cover,
away. Absolutely.
like if you in your head personally have one leading towards a political party over another, you almost find yourself compensating the other direction on where your brain goes just because you don't want to lay that hand down as far as being a journalist. So I find that to be interesting, and it's funny that you say I came out on social media, and I always kind of smile whenever I see like big headlines, so-and-so comes out, and I'm like, bitch, I've been out since I was in Fargo, North Dakota. Twitter was something that you heard from the birds in the morning.
But see,
So,
I think
but you know what? And it was, and I found myself, as Tom was saying, when you begin your career, you want to be very authoritative, because I was 22 years old, and I'm telling people about mill rates and income taxes, and when you're 22, you don't give a flying about that. You just don't. But what I found is, the one thing that I said to myself at the beginning of my career, and my mom, posed a very serious question to me. She goes, do you think that's going to affect you in your career, being out? And I'm like, I don't know, but one thing that I am, as a journalist, expected to do is find the truth and tell the truth. And if I can't even tell the truth about myself, how can I be expected to tell someone else's truth properly?
You know,
What have you found?
Tracy, you and I have had conversations about this.
There's a tape running.
I know, but it's a generational thing too. I think where we've arrived and what's happened in the last 20 years in this regard is just revolutionary. I never thought in my life, you wouldn't dare have mentioned that you were gay in the early years I started. But on the other hand, we had newsrooms that didn't have women in them, didn't have African Americans, didn't have Latinos. It was a different world, and not all that long ago.
And even today in smaller markets, it's the same thing that you have. I mean, if you have the good fortune of living in a larger metropolitan area and you're working there, and people are just exposed to different viewpoints if you live in a larger place. And what we have to be cognizant of is, will that be distracting to your audience? And it is a business after all, and our lives are private. That's what it's all about.
I love where we're at. I think it's wonderful that people can tell people what they really are. How horrible it was in an era that we couldn't openly discuss it. And there are still some people will look at this and that's a black mark against you, you know, if you're, I think the honesty is so wonderful. I think we're moving in the right direction. And I admire young people who, I get such a kick out of young people in our business who are quite open about it and don't feel, and as Sean says,
Well,
this is who I am.
Have you ever, if reporting on LGBT issues, obviously if you're a Latino, Latina, or if you're African American, you don't have to necessarily like disclose, by the way, I'm African American, I'm black, and I'm reporting on the NLGJA. Now, have you found that that's of interest to people, or if it's pertinent, if you were reporting on an LGBT issue, to be your authentic self on air, to disclose something like that or give a nod to it during your report, or you just report it, you just forgive the term straight?
I think you just report it. I mean, because like one of my boss had made a comment to me about some story that involved LGBT. I don't remember what the topic was or what the story directly was about. And he made a comment about, it was about the Sixth Circuit thing down in Cincinnati with the ruling with the gay marriage and stuff like that. And I had to my boss, I'm like, I think this is something that's important to people across the entire state of Ohio, not just people specifically in the Cincinnati area. I think we should cover it. We don't have an affiliate in Cincinnati. And he brought up the point. He's like, well, you're gay. He's like, is this going to have an impact on the story? Is this going to be flawed? I'm like, come on now. Like, I mean, you have to be professional still. I'm not going to go out before every live show and be like, hi, my name is Matt Horn, I am gay. Like, I'm not going to say that right in my live shows, but at the same time, though, I don't think that when you're doing a story like that, I don't think it's important. Like, as long as you tell the story, as long as you are objective and not subjective with the story.
And I have been asked by very, very honestly by producers and managers in my career when I'm reporting on something with the LGBT community, well, we need the other viewpoint. And I'm like, if we're doing a story about like a black family, do we call on like someone who's racist automatically to give a counterpoint? Do we do that?
No.
And no, we don't. And I'm like, why do we give voice to such a minority viewpoint? Why would we do that? And I have found that in past, not necessarily in this market, but in other markets that I've worked in. Yeah.
Can I tell you, because I've had that conversation with news directors before, and it really pisses me off. And the reason is, you didn't ask the woman who went out to cover a women's issue if she was going to be biased.
Exactly.
You didn't ask the African American reporter who went to cover an NAACP issue if they were going to be biased. Why are you asking me, and why are you questioning my professionalism, and how dare you?
Exactly, and I've had issues
and that seems to be a common question that a lot of us have been asked. At the same time, covering a Fred Phelps, you know, I made my photographer crazy and said, oh my God, do we have everything? Because you know what you're thinking, and you're trying, like you said, you're trying to almost overcompensate.
Right.
And the idea that management would even ask that question is infuriating.
The question you're saying, well,
Is you being gay going to affect your coverage?
Right.
Because if
And
you hired me
how do you deal with
to
that?
be a solid reporter, why is it that you think that this is going to be an issue? Did you ask the other members of your staff who are
black or
black,
Latino,
white,
right,
you know,
whatever.
pick
Male, female, yeah,
pick an
right.
issue. They didn't ask them that question. And I'm not sure how to get past that.
Maybe
But
it might be a question of just time.
Time.
You know, I mean,
Yeah.
it's possible that when we were kids, those questions were asked of female reporters and of African American reporters. Excuse me. But I think it's a matter of time, and we've seen like this sea change basically in how people think. But it's a very good point, and it goes to the question of how to be your authentic self. Because if you are flamboyant, like you are just like, I'm great, like do you ring that in order to be on air? What do you do if your manager says you need to not be so gay on air? Like,
That's
how do you
awesome.
deal with
That's
that?
But I don't think.
Said that to anybody?
I'm sure managers have said that.
See, I just don't think that people, I think it just comes down to the fact that if you are too, not just flamboyant, but saying that you fit a quote unquote stereotype too much, you're just not gonna get a job, plain and simple. If they see your resume tape and you are too flamboyant, you're just not gonna get the job unless it's for something that, with the news, or more of a liberal